Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin O'Reilly, and I'm the Deputy Chair for the Committee on Accountability and Oversight. We have a meeting this afternoon, and today members of the committee are joining us by phone and video while they continue to physically distance to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Today's meeting is being broadcast and live streamed. The committee will be hearing from the Honourable Caroline Cochrane, Premier, and the Honourable Diane Thomas, Minister of Health and Social Services, and the Honourable Carolyn Wozniak, Minister of Finance, about an update on the GNWT COVID-19 response. Our first order of business is to open our meeting with a prayer. I will ask MLA, I can't even see who's, I'm going to ask MLA Semler if she would mind doing a prayer for us. I think you're muted. Not sure. Mr. Johnson, would you be able to do a prayer for us? Okay, I'll take anyone.
I have one ready.
Okay, Ms. Marcellus, please, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. May the sun bring you energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by night. May the rain wash away your worries. May the breeze blow new strength into your being. May you walk gently through the world and know its beauty all the days of your life. Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Marcellus, for the prayer. Our next item is review and adoption of the agenda. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one public item on the agenda, a COVID briefing, and then there are some other in-camera committee business items to follow regarding an AOC retreat, the possibility of a briefing, internal briefing on a legislative proposal, and some confidential correspondence received from the Minister of Lands.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda?
Yeah, Kevin, it's Ron.
Please, Mr. Bonnetrouge, go ahead.
I sent it on Facebook too, but some events just come to light recently regarding the NWT housing corporations, their CRA rent scale. If I can get that put on the agenda for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bonnetrouge. Mr. Clerk, can we add the NWT Housing Corp rent scale as a new item of business on the agenda? Okay, thanks. Any other changes, additions to the agenda? Okay, not hearing any. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Ms. Cleveland, thank you. Any objections? No? Okay, motion is carried. We have an agenda approved. Having reviewed and adopted the agenda, are there any declarations of conflict of interest from any members? Hearing none, we will now move on to our first public matter. Good afternoon, Madam Premier. Before you begin your opening remarks, I'd just like to discuss how the meeting will proceed. All comments, questions, and remarks will need to be directed to the chair, and both members and witnesses will need to be recognized by the chair before speaking. This process is required to allow the committee clerk to turn on and off the microphone. Madam Premier, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to brief committee today on some of the key work underway to ensure that the government of the Northwest Territories is well prepared to respond to COVID-19 and the continuing pandemic. With me today are Ministers Tom and Wozniak, along with Martin Goldney, the Secretary to Cabinet, Sandy Kalgutkar, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Russell Noordoff, Associate Deputy Minister responsible for much of our COVID-19 coordination, Joanne Chaqueto, Acting Deputy Minister of Health and Social Services, Charlene Woodward, Principal Secretary, Mira Dunn, my Special Advisor, and Kelly McLaughlin, the Ministerial Special Advisor for Minister Wozniak. We're here today to brief committee on the creation of the COVID-19 Coordinating Secretariat. The Secretariat will create a single agency within the government of the Northwest Territories to bring together a number of important functions and activities for responding to COVID-19 from several departments. This will provide for greater clarity, accountability, and consistency in the government's COVID-19 response and improve our capacity to continue managing this pandemic over the next year or more. To date, Mr. Chair, we've only had 5 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and no community spread. In many ways, we're fortunate, but this simply hasn't been the result of good luck. From the beginning of the pandemic, the government of the Northwest Territories put in place public health measures and other steps to protect our residents and mitigate the risk of community outbreaks. I'll take a moment to also recognize that MLAs, Indigenous and municipal governments, the media, and a host of organizations and community members have contributed to our success in keeping our residents safe to date. The absence of active cases makes it easy to feel complacent. But we know that hundreds of new cases continue to be diagnosed every day in Canada. We know that we need to continue our efforts and prepare as the pandemic remains and a second wave is expected very soon. Government of the Northwest Territory emergency response and public health measures were developed to respond to smaller localized emergencies, not a worldwide pandemic. Despite this, we've been very successful with our protection measures to date. However, we recognize that there's areas that still need our attention. We need to be able to respond to changing circumstances with clear organizational responsibility, collaboration, and capacity. The presentation we prepared today illustrates the existing structure within our organization and describes the recalibration underway to improve it. To be certain, there have been tremendous efforts made by our dedicated public servants to respond to the pandemic. I want to acknowledge and thank the many governments of the Northwest Territories employees who stepped forward to ensure that protective measures were quickly implemented and maintained. This includes the Office of the Chief Public Health Officer, the Emergency Management Organization, the Border Personnel, the Isolation Center staff, the Compliance and Enforcement Team, the 811 call center, the Protect NWT workers, as well as all departments who have had to adjust service delivery and work sites to respond to the pandemic. While we have all been busy, we've also taken the opportunity since the initial development and deployment of our COVID-19 response efforts to assess our current strategy and look for ways to plan in anticipation of our ongoing and future needs. The presentation to follow will address some of the challenges and changes underway. I look forward to your support as our efforts continue and welcome ideas for further improvements to support the residents we serve. Now, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll hand it over to Mr. Nordhoff to take us through a brief presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. Mr. Nordhoff, let's go ahead with the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Premier, and for the opportunity to present on the COVID-19 Coordinating Secretariats. I will get right into the slides. So slide 2 illustrates some of the key elements of the existing GNWT's COVID-19 response structure. It is fair to say that our legislated emergency structures are not well aligned to this type of pandemic emergency, with its duration and scope and the far-reaching implications across the territory and around the globe. It is also fair to say that this is true of most jurisdictions. Our existing structure has allowed us to respond quickly with certain measures, including the innovation of required self-isolation plans, the rapid establishment of border measures and isolation centers, and the establishment of a compliance unit. These and other measures were done quickly out of necessity, and we now have the opportunity to turn our attention to how to improve it. On the right side of this slide, in the blue boxes, you see some of the responsibilities and structures under the Emergency Management Act. Like other jurisdictions, it provides a command center model of emergency management, well aligned with best emergency response practices for natural disasters and more typical single event emergencies. As the pandemic response was implemented, the Territorial Emergency Management Organization played a key role in assisting with the border controls, isolation centers, supply chain monitoring, and procuring supplies, including PPE, and community engagement and preparedness. On the left side of the chart in the red boxes is a description of the Public Health Act emergency response structures. This structure also aligns with the models in other jurisdictions and has proven adept at quickly addressing public health emergencies, including localized outbreaks of other communicable diseases. The public health measures related to the COVID-19 pandemic have been farther reaching than any previous health emergency and have profound implications on every single resident of the Northwest Territories. In the center of the structure, you see some of the reporting structures for oversight and coordination, including a COVID DM committee and committee of cabinet. The reality has been that scope, scale, and far-reaching implications of the necessary response have at times contributed to role confusion, less than clear accountabilities, and challenges in communications. The required response actions have also had to include consideration of other issues, some of which are listed in the bottom left-hand corner box. As we have been looking at ways to improve and prepare for subsequent waves, we have recognized that our structure can be improved to help clarify roles and accountabilities. As we will describe, it is also intended to provide more certainty for those performing dedicated roles and better coordination throughout the organization. Go to the next slide. The government response has been extensive, with resources directed at key efforts in place for many months now. These include the establishment of Protect NWT office in the Department of Health to review self-isolation plans, process requests for exemptions, and take reports and action investigations related to complaints and tips. The isolation centers have been a significant undertaking. These were set up in extremely short order through the efforts of NACA's EMO. Almost immediately, the border measures, including signage and checkpoints and airport screeners, were implemented with critical supports from infrastructure. A call center was also stood up and electronic filing of isolation plans made available in 2 days. In the first month of the pandemic, a compliance and enforcement unit was established and scaled up to deal with the required non-compliance issues and public education. All of this effort occurred quickly with a huge reliance on redeployed staff and dedicated public servants who often working from remote locations and balancing many other demands, both personal and professional. While these have all been tremendous efforts, we also recognize that things can be improved and have looked at the experience over the last 5 months for ways to improve. Significant resources are currently being dedicated to COVID-19 response. A total of 163 positions have been dedicated in full or part-time to that response. Some positions have duties added, and some redeployed staff to COVID-19 work for a period and then split their time with other regular duties. The current approach is heavily reliant on redeployments, and it is not realistic to expect departments to sustain and advance their current work while having significant staff redeployed. Departments that have provided staff redeployments have been very accommodating, but balancing competing operational demands has been a challenge. Having cohorts rotate in and out also creates additional burden for training, and not having staff solely dedicated can create scheduling challenges and additional overtime. Current numbers, however, offer a good demonstration of the existing needs and the magnitude of the response. Go to the next slide. So to address the challenges, the government is proposing to create a secretariat to manage the ongoing response to the COVID pandemic. The secretariat, which will be located within Health and Social Services, is intended to provide more clarity of roles and responsibilities, improve the sustainability of both the COVID response and normal government operations, and provide more opportunity for coordination on policy development, implementation of measures, and communications. In terms of the benefits, on the next slide, the Secretariat will more clearly define the role of the Associate Deputy Minister. The Associate DM was added previously to assist with leadership of efforts early in the pandemic response and has been useful in coordinating activities. However, the split pieces of the structure between Health and MACA have left questions around residual accountability of certain actions among senior officials. This is understandable given the roles and responsibilities set up distinctly within different departments. Coordinated and shared work has still been done throughout the GNWT's response, with the attitude that necessary steps should just be done without necessarily determining who was accountable for which pieces. But we recognize that clarity in roles and responsibilities should be preferred, and confusion and any potential delays avoided. The Secretariat also offers the opportunity to put some more horsepower in policy, planning, communications, and logistical support, with resources dedicated exclusively to those functions. The Office of the Chief Public Health Officer will continue to be closely linked. The office needs to remain independent and focused on the expert medical advice required in the development of public health orders. However, having the implementation pieces clearly defined and supported should help ensure that the organization is prepared to implement measures that are well considered and communicated. Having the teams involved in Protect NWT, 811, isolation centers, border patrol, and compliance and enforcement under one administrative roof should allow for more efficient and coordinated operation. A key benefit in recognizing that our COVID response may be longer term than initially hoped is that this footing allows for a more sustainability in staffing. Heavy reliance on redeployed staff is challenging for the donor departments, and staff involved have often faced competing demands and priorities. Although not on the slide, we also recognize the need for an evaluation framework as part of our implementation. This will help ensure that we are meeting our needs and objectives for service improvement. Work is underway to establish a framework so that this can immediately begin collecting data and monitoring the improvements of the outcomes. In terms of staffing, the staffing anticipated in the new Secretariat is broken down on the slide. Many staff working on the response currently are expected to continue within the new structure, but there has already been a significant amount of effort in staffing. Finance has established a dedicated team to move job descriptions and evaluation work forward quickly and assist in filling roles as quick as possible. As with any structure, there will be the opportunity to adjust as circumstances warrant. Ideally, this level of staffing resourcing will not be required for years, but we do have to prepare ourselves for the possibility that some measures, in some form or another, will be required for a while. If we find ourselves with less requirements for things like border patrol or isolation centers, we can all hope will happen at some future date that is sooner rather than later. We can also scale down. The next slide illustrates how the proposed COVID Secretariat will fit into the GNWT. Whereas previously COVID operational response activities were located within several departments, the creation of the Secretariat allows for the responsibility for those operational activities to be brought into one unit located within health, helping to reduce the confusion on roles and responsibilities. The Secretariat's operational activities include border compliance, enforcement, isolation centers, Protect NWT, 811, and logistical operations. Other departments will be able to more clearly resume their new normal operations. This includes leading required changes within their areas of responsibility to respond to COVID. For example, education will continue to work with school boards on the required changes to the schools for COVID. MACA will continue with responsibility for responding to emergencies, including working with communities on their emergency response. Health will house the Secretariat and the Chief Public Health Officer's Office, and Health will continue to be responsible for other very important COVID response activities like pandemic planning, testing, and surge planning. In terms of the proposed structure, looking at the organization chart at a high level, the structure includes a dedicated associate DM supported by 3 directors, 5 managers, and a senior advisor. This structure is intended to find the appropriate balance of having the required supports without being too top-heavy. The final structure might be tweaked as it is implemented, and it should be scalable so that if circumstances change, it can be adjusted. At our highway and airport borders, airport officers may be part-time as they are required only where flights with passengers arriving from outside of the NWT are occurring. Currently, there are 16 positions doing airport-related duties, and the model proposes 17. Highway border work is full-time, and current master list identifies 22 highway border positions, mostly working 4 on, 6 off shifts, requiring considerable overtime. This structure proposes 24 positions. It is anticipated that by having dedicated offers and improved scheduling, overtime costs will be reduced. In compliance and enforcement, there are currently 2 Deputy Chief Public Health Officers, 5 regional leads, and 23 officer positions rotating in and out, off and on. Recruitment into these positions on a full-time basis has been a challenge. The Secretariat proposed structure has 5 leads and 15 officers exclusively dedicated to COVID-19 work. These are all regional positions located in regional centers, and work is underway to recruit full-time individuals into these positions already. For the isolation centers, ideally this work may be contracted out to create economic opportunity and take advantage of existing competencies. Consideration of the requirements to contract out this work is ongoing. Assuming that the function is delivered by the GNWT, the proposed structure would see 14 positions plus 9 relief workers. For Protect NWT, the proposed structure shows 24 positions. These are the call center operators and the folks that review complaints, applications for exemptions, and self-isolation plans. There has been a considerable challenge in recruitment and retention of staff in the current organization, and many positions have been consistently vacant. Recruitment activities currently underway will be used to help staff positions in the Secretariat. Better retention is expected with clearly defined duties and longer-term hiring commitments. 811 is another area with the potential for contracting out, and that is being explored. The Secretariat proposes 12 positions plus 4 relief positions. Current support operators provide info on what is happening in communities, and the other operators provide COVID-19 health information. The corporate services function perhaps adds the most incrementality, as many of the existing responsibilities are being managed by staff with other competing responsibilities. The proposed structure would see a dedicated finance and admin unit and dedicated policy and communications. Resources are also being added to improve internal processes and policies to help achieve efficiencies and to improve training. The structure also includes a COVID logistics unit to manage the functions currently being undertaken within MACA and EMO. As announced previously, the Premier will retain leadership of the COVID emergency response, and the Associate DM of the Secretariat will report to her. A large number of required tasks to transition from the existing response structure to the Secretariat will begin immediately. Ideally, this transition will be completed before a second wave. We will work to minimize potential disruptions to our response efforts as the Secretariat is set up. A supplemental funding bill will be brought into the Legislative Assembly to seek approval for the required funding during the next session. As noted previously, departments are currently undertaking these pandemic response activities and incurring the expenditures. The SUP bill will bring together those expenditures, and we will seek to recover these costs from Canada as the opportunity does allow. And thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Newdorf. What we're going to try to do here is allow for each of our regular MLAs who are part of the meeting or on video or on the phone to ask a question. And I'd like to suggest an order to my colleagues here. Mr. Lafferty, Mr. Bonnetrouge, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Semler, Mr. Jacobson, Mr. Simpson, Ms. Cleveland. So I've got a few indicating that they have questions on my computer here, but I'd like to start with Mr. Lafferty. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Chair. Probably just a quick question about the overall Secretariat. Obviously, I'm more interested in the cost of your function as a Secretariat to establish another, in my view, is another bureaucratic Secretariat. So I just wondered how much it will cost us on an annual basis. I know there's subs coming. So this is an area that, of course, is interesting to me, the cost factor. Because with the amount of cost, you can create positions in the community. So, yeah, it's just the overall cost, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I think there was a little bit of echo there, but I think we heard the question clearly about overall cost of the structure and implementing it and so on. And I'm going to turn it over to okay, we're going to go to Mr. Kalgatkar, the Deputy Minister of Finance, for a response to that question. And Mr. Kalgatkar, if you sort of have like a monthly amount or a quarterly amount for running the Secretariat, I think that would be helpful because, of course, we don't know how long this is going to be in place. But please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've costed the Secretariat to last for about just over 2.5 years. For the remaining part of this fiscal year, starting from, I believe, July 1st to the end of this fiscal year, we're projecting the cost to be around $32 million. The full-year cost for 21-22 is estimated to be slightly over $40 million. And then for about 4 months in the 22-23 fiscal year, we're estimating the cost to be slightly under $14 million. I do want to say that these are costs based on the current measures that we have in place now in terms of the 14-day isolation period requirement and the other measures that the Chief Public Health Officer has mandated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kalgatkar. MLA Lafferty, I hope you're able to hear the response. It looks like for 4 months it would be about $14 million, and anticipating that it would be in place for about 2.5 years. I think I got that right, but MLA Lafferty, did you have any follow-up question? Thanks.
obviously I can hear you, Thierry, as chair, but yeah, that's a substantial amount of cost factor, obviously. No, just I guess the layout plan that's soon to come. Well, obviously we'll have to monitor it. But as I stated before, if we create another secretariat, I think we're just putting more our resource towards that. Instead of small communities, we need to create positions and programs and whatnot. So we're still missing out on that. So, but I just want to stress that it is a cost factor to the public, and I'm more concerned in that area. So, but I just want to I guess lay that out. So because I do have concern with that. And at the beginning, obviously, I didn't support the secretary going forward. I still feel the same, but that's just me. If we can create these areas into our small communities, we have fiber optic that's not connecting to small communities. That's a prime example that we should be focusing on. But this is an area that obviously the COVID-19 is among us, and we need to deal with it. So, but this will surely be closely monitored. But it's a huge cost factor that it's worrisome, but it is what it is. So it's before us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lafferty. So, of course, we'll have another chance to look at this when the supplementary appropriation bill comes forward. And the actual staffing of the positions is found on page 7 of the presentation. 44% of those positions are going to be located outside of Yellowknife. But next on my list is Mr. Bonnet Rouge. Did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, those costs are kind of mind-blowing at this time because the federal government is not paying for it. But since we raised the debt ceiling, I guess we're figuring we got lots of money to play with. That's concerning. I'm glad that Jackson brought that up. That was one of my questions. Down the road, we don't know. It seems like we're going to have to go for some cuts somewhere down the line. Anyways, my question is, there's lots of talk about the second wave coming. My question, I guess, is how is it determined that there is going to be a second wave? Mussy?
Thanks, Mr. Bonnet Rouge. I'm just looking over at the Premier to see that Premier has indicated she'd like to respond to the question. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And after I'm spoken, if you, Minister Tom might have additional, but I'll try to address them. For one, I want to start with the cost. Yes, the costs are huge. However, the federal government has provided some funding with our Safe Restart, and we're also in the middle of negotiating a northern package. So we are expecting that the federal government will supplement some of this cost. Not all of it. Be nice if it was all of it, but some of it will be. And this is the worst case scenario that we provided to the committee. It's not the best case scenario. As things transpire, they may have to be changed accordingly. How do we know there's a second wave coming? Research throughout the world is saying that we can expect a second wave. We can certainly expect a second wave, at least in fear with people. The fall brings in the flu season. Traditionally, people end up sicker within the fall season. There'll be more demand on people getting tested, people having to stay in isolations, etc. Whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's a flu, we have to make sure that of what we're dealing with. So no matter what happens, there will be a higher incidence based on the cold season that is coming. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm not sure if the Minister of Health would like to, Minister Tom would like to expand on that, or if she's fine with my explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. Minister Tom, is there anything that you would like to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, not at this time. I think the Premier summed it up. We're looking at, establishing this this secretariat, so it's going to cost money, but I mean, you know, it's something that our territories need right now. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Minister Tom. I'm just going to add, Madam Premier, I think Mr. Kalgutkar ran a bunch of numbers by us, and you mentioned that it's a worst-case scenario. Is there any way you could give us maybe in some supplemental information about those costs, and if there's other scenarios, that would be really helpful, I think, for us to have. That's something you can do. And Premier's shaking her head yes, so that's great. I'd like to, I think you're shaking your head yes, so no dispute there. So Mr. Bonterouge, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think we're just going on the presumption that fall time brings colds. They don't necessarily do. Not that I've known from the past anyways. And you may be seeing higher incidents. I know some people are starting to get some colds here and there. I don't think it was in the children, but what is going to be the practice moving forward, whether it's children or adults, especially in the schools, for testing capabilities in the small communities and the turnaround for results? I'm hearing that the Diavik Diamond Mine has a unique, probably high standard testing kit that's pretty much done on the spot. You got any comments in that regard, Mussy?
Thanks, Emily Bonterouge. That sounds like a health question, so I think we're going to go to the Minister of Health for a response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have with me Joanne Chiquetto. She, you know, our department, we're working on some testing methods. So I'll get Joanne to speak more in detail about what these testing methods are, because we currently have some in the Northwest Territories. So I'll get Joanne to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister Tom. Ms. Chiquetto, can you please go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, we have our current testing capacity in the Northwest Territories. We send the majority of our tests to Alberta. We are focusing on symptomatic testing currently, and our goal, currently our testing turnaround time on average is about 4 days. Our goal is to have testing capacity in the Northwest Territories increased so that we can actually perform the testing within the Northwest Territories. We've been working with our colleagues consistently, step by step, with Health Canada to look at what testing equipment is available and that is approved through Health Canada. We have currently ordered additional testing equipment so that we can increase our capacity in the Northwest Territories. Currently, on average, we test between 100 and 150 clients. We want to be able to test all symptomatic clients for sure, and ideally test those clients here in our territory so we have a turnaround time that is much quicker than on average of 4 days. So our goal is to actually increase our capacity to approximately 2,000 tests per week, and our goal would be to do that within the next approximate 6 weeks. So in short, we have a number of activities that are underway to improve and increase our testing capacity, and that also includes the shipment of our tests into regional centers, and it also includes hiring. This will require us to hire a couple of extra staff to ensure that we have the folks that have the specialized skill to be able to process these tests in a timely manner here in the Northwest Territories. So that's our ultimate goal.
Okay, thanks for that information. So we'll look forward to being able to do our own test around the middle of October. That would be great. I'd like to move on to the next Emily on my list. Mr. Johnson, do you have any questions? Ms. Johnson, are you muted? Because we can't hear you. Thanks. Okay, we're going to move forward with Ms. Johnson. I'll put you back in the queue next, but I'd like to go to Ms. Semler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're great. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay. Just looking at all of the staffing positions, I know the presentation was cutting in and out, so I just wanted to clarify and possibly ask a question. With all of the different positions that are within this COVID tree, are they the redeployed staff that are we keeping in those positions? And I know that I heard that they're recruiting. How are we recruiting, and are we ensuring that when we're recruiting that we're following our affirmative action and those policies to make sure that we're hiring local staff? Because this issue has come to my attention that, we've brought in outside staff to take on some of these positions without being advertised. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily Semler. I'm going to go to the Premier for a response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A combination of the above. So the first, when we first got COVID-19 first hit the Northwest Territories, we looked internally. We deployed many employees from existing departments. It wasn't sustainable. People were trying to manage things like border patrols at the airports, etc., and then doing their work off the side of their desk. People were burning out quickly, and very dedicated people. So within this new secretariat, what we're proposing, because we can't be expecting employees to do it off the side of their desk, that is not okay, is that there would be a combination. Some of them would be having the opportunity to actually look at redeployments and doing transfer assignments if that's their areas of interest, and other ones would be going out to competition. The ones that are going out to competition, of course, would be following our current hiring processes, including the affirmative action policies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. Maybe could you give us the org charts and indicate whether you anticipate staffing each of the positions, or whether they're currently filled, or a listing of some sort? I think that would be probably helpful for us to have.
Can you do that, Russ? Might need. Yeah, I'm not sure what you.
Okay, we're going to get that information. Ms. Semler, can you go ahead, please? Sorry, Mr.
Yes.
Neudorf would like
Thank you.
sorry, Ms. Semler, Mr. Neudorf wants to add something here, and then we'll come back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We certainly have the org charts, and we can give you a little bit, the detail that's in the org chart so you can read it a little bit better. But we're just in the process of filling those boxes. And so, obviously we've been just starting to work on the Secretariat. There's lots of work required in order to fill those. We have a dedicated team within the Department of Finance that will help us with the staffing of those positions and following all the government policies as we indicated. How those boxes get filled is going to be a wide variety of means to do that. In some cases, and it's ideal actually if there are people in those positions now that can move into the new position. So we'll take that. Sometimes we're going to have to recruit to find new people. Of course, we have to be sensitive to departments and their needs to making sure that they can get back to their normal operations as well. So in terms of giving you a chart that has people in the various boxes. I don't think I could do that because it's going to be changing, I hope, every day for the next little while. But, as we get more set up, then we could certainly be able to share that information. But I would think it'd be, in a month or two that we could share some more detailed, comprehensive information, if that would work.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, we'll look forward to getting further reports. Ms. Semler, I'll go back to you, please.
Yes, thank you. My other question is related to staffing as well, but it kind of bounces off of some of Ron's question about testing and all that. And I know that the minister and her department has stated that they're going to be recruiting extra staff, knowing what we know, how hard it is to recruit staff on these lab techs and staffing are probably throughout Canada very hard to come by right now. How is the Northwest Territories securing that we will have enough staff? Are expecting a second wave, and if we do get an influx, so we need lab techs and we need nurses and we need doctors and we need all that stuff. I just want to make sure that we have
Okay, no, thanks, Emily Semler. You're cutting in and out, but I think we got the gist of it, that some of these are highly technical positions, much in demand across the country. So if you folks could tell us a little bit more about how you intend to try to recruit them, that would be great. Sorry, we'll go to Ms. Chiquetto with Department of Health and Social Services. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Minister Tom here. So I recognize that hiring technical staff is difficult. Right now, we have for the rapid testing, we have hired one staff so far. We need 2 more. So we are in the process of looking to have all these positions filled. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks to the Minister for that. We still have some more people here on the list, so I'd like to try to move forward. Mr. Johnson, are you back on the... Okay, Mr. Johnson's not on the call again. Mr. Jacobson, are you on the call? Do you have any questions? No, not on the call. I don't believe Mr. Simpson is. Oh, Mr. Simpson, are you on the call? And do you have any questions?
Yes, I'm on the call, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question, and I guess the first one would be for the winter. Will the border enforcement remain at the border, or are we looking to move it back to Enterprise? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. I think we'll go to Mr. Newdorf for a response. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have a final decision on that yet, but we are leaning to staying where we are. We do like the fact that it is right at the border, and we can catch or stop people that are right across the border as they're entering the Northwest Territories. There is a bit of work to do for that. We have to make sure that the staff there can operate at that remote location in the wintertime. We do want to improve the cell coverage there so that we can do a better job in accessing protect NWT and self-isolation plans, and that work is underway. And then we do need to make sure we've got accommodations for the staff that work there through the wintertime. But those activities are underway, so we anticipate that we'll be able to stay where we are.
Thanks, Mr. Newdorf. Mr. Simpson, do you have a supplementary you'd like to ask? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Next question here is, with better testing or quicker testing, will we see a decrease in the 14-day self-isolation period? Possibly. Will that be reduced? That's one question I can get from people. So Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. I think we're going to go to the Premier for a response. I know there was a story on CBC Radio this morning about this as well, but please, Premier, go ahead.
Thank you. So earlier on, I'd stated that the cost figures were at the worst case scenario. We are hoping that as we get more testing units and quicker testing units, that actually we will be able to look at some cost savings. The isolation, if we have people that are tested in the first, with 2 tests, a couple of tests, we can actually look at perhaps some self-monitoring versus the isolation. Those are discussions we're still at this moment, but we are hopeful that with the new testing capacity that we'll be able to lower the isolation, which will save us money and also is more humane for people. It's a long time to be sitting in isolation for 14 days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. I believe we have Mr. Johnson back on the line. If you'd like, Mr. Johnson, do you have a question you'd like to ask? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll start with a comment. I'm happy to see this. I know that we've had very large issues staffing Protect NWT, and if this helps fix that, then I'm happy. I guess we need some centralization. I think we might even be able to encourage more. We're a few months into this, and I don't think I fully understand, nor the public understands the difference between what a public health officer does, Protect NWT does, and 811 does. I have had the Protect NWT people tell me to call 811, and I've had 811 tell me vice versa. So I think there's probably even some more opportunity to combine those. That's a comment, take it or leave it. And I guess my question is, I'm a little confused where the economic response lies in this. Does this new COVID secretariat going to be responsible for the economic response? Because clearly Protect NWT doesn't have that in mind. But I know there was some work on our Emerging Wisely plan and bringing back some of those economic factors. But will that be an ITI, finance, or the COVID secretariat? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. So there was, I guess, one point about 811 and the Protect NWT functions. Do you folks want to comment on that or not? Yeah. Okay, the Premier's going to take that, and then Mr. Johnson, we're going to come back to your last question there as well. Thanks. Go ahead, Madam Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So absolutely, we are looking for more efficiencies. Perhaps the 811 and the Protect NWT can actually be combined. Those are things that we are looking at. When we first started with COVID-19, none of us knew what we were doing. There was no such thing as a plan. So there was a lot of role confusion, even amongst cabinet members. We weren't sure which ministers were responsible. This whole COVID secretariat will actually alleviate that confusion. It will make sure that departments because now the departments are split, it'll make sure that the team is sitting at the table talking. So we are looking at more clearer organization, more clearer responsibilities with that. As for the comment on will it take care of the economic relief, no, absolutely not. COVID-19 Secretariat is to deal with the potential of COVID-19 outbreaks to protect our residents. The economic recovery and social recovery are separate and will still go as per the plan that we had provided to AOC a few months back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Madam Premier. Mr. Johnson, a quick follow-up?
No, that answered my questions. I look forward for further discussions on the economic recovery. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Johnson. Next on my list is Ms. Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First off, thank you very much for this today. I guess what I'd like to request, I guess it's not a question to start me off, it's a comment and a request that with the supplementary information that the Premier has agreed to give us in regards to cost, I'd also like to request that the costs of how it's currently operating be involved in that, so that we can reflect on the cost differences as we're going through the different options. So I'd like to add that request in. As far as my constituency, the concerns of my constituents really revolve around testing enforcement and business continuity. And so I'd also like to request, or at least have a conversation about a dedicated email or preferably a dedicated email for the business community to be able to submit their isolation plans to preserve business continuity in the Northwest Territories. And my first question would be in regards to compliance officers. Currently, when NWT residents report non-compliance or people not following isolation or concerns about that, there isn't kind of mechanism for residents to feel that they're actually being heard and that that compliance is being taken seriously. So I'm wondering if we can hear a little bit about what residents can expect from compliance officers when they do report going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. So I think you actually managed to sneak 3 questions in your time. So I'll go to the Premier to respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I was writing like crazy there. So yes, we did agree to give you supplementary costs. Actually, though, the cost of what it's currently operating might be a little bit more difficult to give. Again, we had to redeploy people off the side of their desks. So what it would cost for somebody from MACA that might be doing their job to come in and do this work, do I code that to COVID-19 now, or that person has still been doing their work with municipal and community affairs? Do I split that figure? Do I leave it with municipal and community affairs? Those are a little bit more difficult, so I'm not going to commit to actually being able to give you the current costs, because we could give you the additional costs, but I'm not sure if we could actually break down all of the redeployments and how much is in their home departments and how much they put towards that. So that would be a huge endeavor for us. So respectfully, I would not like to provide that. The testing enforcement, I agree. We need to work on that. There have been complaints. We tried to do with Protect NWT and the 811, but having it within a secretariat in one agency may allow us to look at that and actually have more streamlined services for that. I'm not sure if the issue is that people just don't know if they've been heard or not. That might be an issue, because every complaint to Protect NWT has been followed up. Either they've been found to be unfounded, or if they do result in an investigation, those investigations are taking place. So again, that goes back to the capacity when it was all redeployed from different departments and everybody was scrambling to do this off the side of their desk. Our communications probably wasn't the best in that. So having this dedicated secretariat will have a communications team that actually can look at how we address those issues to the public. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. Ms. Cleveland, follow-up?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate that it might be hard to look at the cost of how we're doing it today, but as far as us being able to do our due diligence on our side of the house, being able to compare what's happening today to a potential price tag of $105 million, over 2.5 years would be very helpful to be able to look at the full picture. My next question is in regards to contracting out 811, and I'm wondering if the COVID Secretariat has, 811 was an amazing feature that came out of COVID. Having a distinct line that people could call and access information from the GNWT without having to figure out where to go to get that information was probably one of the strongest comms pieces that came out of COVID-19, and is something that I think that people would love to be able to maintain in the future. So I'm wondering if, rather than contracting out 811, if purchasing kind of a call center type function that maintains NWT residents' ability to have a distinct number that they can call down the road and access information on government services is something that the Secretariat has considered when they're looking at how to operate 811. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. I'm going to go to Mr. Newdorf for a response. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. One of the reasons for creating the Secretariat is so we can bring the various operational areas responding to COVID-19 together and look at efficiencies and opportunities and what's worked good, what does the public like, and what services aren't being utilized, and opportunities to improve and efficiencies that way. I think with 811, it provides information around COVID related to the health, and that's being used moderately. It also provides information to communities. So if you have a question about kind of COVID-related services within your community, you can call that. And the uptake on that has been very minimal. And so I think we have an opportunity to take a step back and see if there would be some efficiencies to be gained by combining 811 with Protect NWT. Maybe we can take the two organizations and make one that's a little bit stronger and provide a little better service by doing it. So we'll be looking forward to doing that. At the same time, 911 continues to be there for any emergencies and backups that we might want as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Newdorf. I think we have Ms. Martselis on the phone joining us. Ms. Martselis, do you have any questions for our guest today?
Well, we always say the best for last, right?
Of course. Please go ahead.
I know you want to do a coordinated approach to the whole COVID-19 pandemic. And first of all, I would like to get the sticky notes for your new Associate Deputy Minister of the new COVID-19 Secretariat. I think that should have been on with our notes today. I have a problem, three things that I want to ask about. One of them is the whole COVID-19 response structure. So you have all these charts with the Minister of HSS, Executive Council, COVID-19 COC, and then you have Minister Mack on the other side. In the end, who has the ultimate responsibility if anything ever happened up here? Who actually has the say? The government, the Chief Public Health Officer? I want clarification. Or the Premier? Who actually has the ultimate responsibility on behalf of the government of the Northwest Territories?
Okay, thanks, Emily Martselis. I'm going to go to the Premier for a response to that question. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a combination. So currently, within our current system, the Minister of Health and Social Services has the authority to declare a public health emergency. Once she calls it on the advice of the Chief Public Health Officer, if the Minister of Health and Social Services decides to call a public health emergency, at that point within our legislation, the Chief Public Health Officer has the authority regarding the health of people. However, it's not as easy as just saying that the Chief Public Health Officer has all of the authority. Her authority ends with the health and safety of people. COVID-19 is not just about the health and safety. There's a lot of other factors. The Chief Public Health Officer doesn't have the authority to say that we need to have isolation units that are filled by this amount of people, those kind of things. So it's a combination. So as Premier, within this model, like I had said earlier, when we first got hit with COVID-19 within our current structure, the Minister of Municipal Community Affairs, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Infrastructure, the Premier, everyone had different pieces of it, and it became very convoluted and very confusing to ourselves, not only the public. So within this model, the authority would come to the Premier, who accounts to Cabinet. the executive. So all cabinet would have as much say as possible within this. The Premier would have the authority, but the Chief Public Health Officer still has the responsibility for public health in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. Ms. Martellus, follow-up question?
Yeah, well, I have a couple of things, because, I mean, that was, I just want to make sure that we know that the Premier has the ultimate responsibility on behalf of the government of the Northwest Territories. Am I correct in assuming that, eh? Well, one of the things that I want to talk, there's a couple of things I want to talk about, two things. One is the costing summary, and the other is staffing. This costing summary that was given is very vague. Yeah. And when the question was asked by MLA Lafferty, he went on about 32 million, and then the next 2021-22 was 40 million, and I guess I just expect a little bit more detail from a Deputy Minister of Finance at that level. I mean, what we should say on this costing summary is the revenues that we're going to be using and where it's coming from the government of the Northwest Territories, how much of the COVID money that we got from the federal government should be on this costing summary. So we have a better idea as ordinary MLAs and MLAs in general to see where the monies are coming from. I know we're going to be going into more greater detail at a future date, but I just expect a little bit more than what we got today. And I'm quite concerned about the tremendous costs. And I'm also quite concerned that with the allocations of staff. I know my colleague from Inuvik, MLA Zembler, kind of went into it a little bit, but and there's a short staffing, one little page here about Yellowknife 84, Inuvik 22, Haverford 24, Fort Smith 12, but no detail. Nobody says how many new out of the 84, how many are, and how many are from within government, and how many new positions are going to be asked for out of the 84. And you expect us to say, yeah, this is okay. I'm not used to doing business that way. I'm very much a numbers person, and I'm also very concerned that a lot of the COVID money that is being spent, and I've said this many times in AOC and in caucus, that we are not looking at regional centers and smaller communities. So we're having everything centralized again, and comments are always being made. We're not getting anything for Yellowknife, but I'm concerned that our smaller communities and our regional centers are always the ones that seem to get a shorter end of the stick. And I'd like some comments on those on just what I said. And I expect a better costing summary as soon so I know exactly where everything is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Martellus. We do have the assurance that the Premier is going to provide us with additional cost information, and I think they're going to provide some additional information on the staffing, but I'm going to let the Premier respond as well. And of course, we're going to be dealing with a supplementary appropriation that will lay out some of this information in more detail for us as well. But Madam Premier, please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we can speak a little bit more in the in-camera session around the costing, but in fairness, probably better to give a little bit more time so we can look at it. Again, this was worst-case scenario. We have got some federal money. We're still negotiating for our northern package, so we haven't got that yet. I do know that that all premiers across Canada have been advocating for the three northern territories for additional funding. As for the staffing allocations, I agree. I think that as much as possible, we do need to look at decentralizing from Yellowknife to sustainability for smaller communities. However, COVID-19 might not be the time that we want to look at that. We need to have the coordination. We need to have the teams together. If we have the enforcement team in outside of Yellowknife and the isolation units in another community and the border patrol in another community, we're back to square one. That was part of the problem that we had with the initial, was that many departments had it, and we weren't coordinating and communicating appropriately. So I believe it's 44% of these positions will be outside of the Northwest Territory or outside of Yellowknife, but there needs to be the coordination that will come with headquarters to make sure that we are prepared and that we aren't in the same position as we were at the beginning of COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Madam Premier. I guess I understand that the Premier has a 4 o'clock meeting with First Ministers or something, so I'd like to suggest to our colleagues that we end this public portion of the presentation and move into our in-camp items. Any objections to us proceeding in that fashion? Okay, can I get a motion to move in camera for the remainder of our meeting? Did I see Ms. Semler raising her hand? Okay, so we have a motion to move in camera. Any objections? Okay, thanks. That concludes the. Sorry, I'm not. I'd like to suggest that we move in camera. I know the Premier has a limited amount of time with us today, and I think so. I'd like to get a motion to move in camera. Ms. Semler, thank you. Any objections? Not seeing or hearing any, then I'd like to thank our presenters here with us today and those on the line for the public portion of our meeting, and we'll just take a very short break here while we do a bit of a reset. So again, thanks very much to everybody who's participated. Thanks to the public for watching today, and we'll resume the in-camera portion of our meeting momentarily. Thank you.
I didn't want to correct you publicly. It's not an FM memo. I had that just before, actually. So it's just media. I was fine.
Okay.
But I wasn't going to correct you on that.
Sure.